My name is Lloyd, and I'm 54 years old. For 40 years, I called the same Victorian house my home. I raised my son there, watched him grow up, graduate, and eventually bring home the woman who would become his wife. When they got married 2 years ago, I thought our family was complete. Living together under one roof seemed perfect. The house was big enough for all of us, and I loved having them close. But sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. What happened next shattered everything I believed about family loyalty. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with difficult family situations, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this all unfolded. The house itself was a beauty. A 3-story Victorian I purchased back in 1985 when property values were reasonable and my construction business was thriving. Nestled on nearly an acre of land, it featured original hardwood floors, bay windows that caught the morning sun perfectly, and a wraparound porch where I spent countless evenings watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. The property included a detached garage, a tool shed I built myself, and gardens that became my pride and joy after I took early retirement 3 years ago. My son Marcus, now 29, had always been the quiet type. As a software engineer, he preferred his computer screen to confrontation, much like his mother had before she passed away 8 years ago from cancer. Marcus inherited her gentle nature, which I always considered a blessing, until it became clear that this same gentleness might also be his weakness. He met Amanda through a dating app, and their courtship lasted 18 months before he proposed. At 27, Amanda seemed like the perfect match for my reserved son. Initially, Amanda charmed everyone. She complimented my cooking, asked about my stories from the construction business, and even helped me plant new roses in the side garden. She had shoulder-length auburn hair, always wore modest clothing, and spoke softly with what seemed like genuine interest in family life. When they announced their engagement, I felt nothing but joy. The wedding was small but elegant, held in our backyard under the oak tree I planted when Marcus was born. After the wedding, we established what seemed like a natural living arrangement. I occupied the main floor with my bedroom, study, and access to the kitchen and living areas. Marcus and Amanda took over the entire second floor, converting the largest bedroom into their master suite and using the smaller room as Amanda's home office. The third floor remained storage space filled with family memories and Christmas decorations. My daily routine involved early morning coffee on the porch, tending to my extensive vegetable garden, and maintaining the property. Having worked with my hands for 35 years, retirement meant channeling that energy into perfecting our home. I installed new gutters, repaired deck boards, and landscaped areas that had been neglected during my busiest working years. The physical activity kept me healthy and gave me purpose. However, subtle changes began emerging about 6 months after they settled in. Amanda started making small comments about needing more privacy, suggesting that newlyweds required space to adjust to married life. She mentioned that hearing my television in the evenings made it difficult for her to concentrate on her freelance graphic design work. Initially, these seemed like reasonable requests from a young woman adapting to multi-generational living. The first concrete rule appeared innocuously enough. Amanda approached me one Tuesday morning while I prepared breakfast, explaining that she preferred to have the kitchen to herself during certain hours for meal preparation. She claimed that having multiple people cooking simultaneously created chaos and inefficiency. Since I typically ate simple meals and rarely spent extended time cooking, I agreed without much thought. Marcus remained largely silent during these early negotiations, offering occasional nods or non-committal responses when asked for his opinion. I attributed his behavior to the natural awkwardness of mediating between his wife and father. Young marriages required adjustment periods, and I remembered my own challenges balancing my mother's expectations with my wife's preferences when we first married. The kitchen restriction marked the beginning of an escalating pattern of limitations that slowly transformed me from homeowner to unwelcome guest in my own residence. What started as Amanda's polite request for cooking privacy evolved into a rigid schedule where I could only access the kitchen during specific morning hours and after 8 in the evening. She posted a handwritten chart on the refrigerator, color-coded to indicate her exclusive cooking times. Next came the television rules. Amanda complained that my evening news programs were too loud and interfered with her work schedule. She suggested I limit television viewing to before 9 o'clock in the evening, explaining that she and Marcus needed quiet time for relaxation and conversation. When I mentioned that I enjoyed late-night sports broadcasts, she countered that married couples required uninterrupted evenings together. The restrictions multiplied weekly. I could no longer invite my longtime friend George over for our traditional Sunday afternoon card games because Amanda claimed visitors disrupted the household's peaceful atmosphere. My morning routine of playing classical music while doing stretches on the back porch was deemed too noisy for their sleeping schedule, despite the fact that they rarely arose before 9 on weekends. Marcus's behavior during these conversations troubled me most. Rather than defending his father or finding compromises, he simply stared at his hands or mumbled agreements with whatever Amanda proposed. When I attempted private conversations with my son about the changing household dynamics, he deflected with phrases like, "Amanda just needs time to adjust," or "We're all learning to live together." The most painful restriction involved my workshop in the basement. For decades, I used this space for woodworking projects, home repairs, and general tinkering that kept both my skills sharp and my mind occupied. Amanda declared that my power tools created vibrations that disturbed her concentration during daytime work hours. Since her graphic design business operated primarily during traditional business hours, this effectively banned me from my workshop except for late evenings. Each new limitation felt like a small betrayal, but I justified them by telling myself that compromise was necessary for family harmony. I had lived alone for 8 years since my wife's death, and perhaps I had grown set in my ways. Maybe Amanda's requests were reasonable adjustments for communal living, and my resistance stemmed from selfish habits rather than legitimate grievances. The breaking point approached during a particularly tense dinner conversation in early October. Amanda casually mentioned that she and Marcus had discussed future living arrangements and wondered aloud whether our current situation was sustainable long-term. She suggested that multi-generational households worked better when each generation maintained separate residences, citing articles she had read about elderly parents finding fulfillment in age-appropriate communities. That evening, I overheard Amanda speaking on the phone in their upstairs bedroom. While I never intended to eavesdrop, her voice carried through the old house's thin walls as I passed through the hallway. She was explaining to someone that they had an old man problem and needed to explore options for encouraging independence. The conversation continued with references to property values and market timing, though I could not discern enough details to understand her complete meaning. Friday morning arrived with an ominous sense of anticipation that I could not shake. Marcus and Amanda were already seated in the living room when I emerged from my bedroom, both wearing serious expressions that immediately set me on edge. Coffee cups sat untouched on the table before them, and Amanda clutched a folder containing what appeared to be documents or papers. "Dad, we need to talk." Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper. He could not meet my eyes, instead focusing intently on his folded hands. Amanda sat rigidly beside him, her posture radiating determination and barely contained impatience. "Lloyd," Amanda interrupted, her tone crisp and businesslike, "we've been discussing our living situation extensively and we've reached some difficult conclusions. This arrangement isn't working for any of us, and it's time to make some changes." My stomach dropped as I sensed the direction this conversation was heading, but I remained silent, waiting for them to articulate whatever decision they had reached without my input or consultation. "We think it would be best for everyone if you found your own place." Amanda continued, opening her folder and removing several printed pages. "We've researched some lovely senior communities in the area, and there are several apartments available that would be perfect for someone in your situation." The words hit me like physical blows. Senior communities, someone in my situation, as if I had become a problem requiring a solution rather than a father deserving respect and consideration. "This is my house," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign and distant even to my own ears. "I've lived here for 40 years. I raised Marcus here. This is my home." Amanda's expression remained unchanged, but she retrieved another document from her folder. "Actually, Lloyd, the property deed tells a different story. Marcus is the legal owner now, remember? You transferred ownership to him last year for tax purposes." The memory crashed over me like ice water. Indeed, my accountant had recommended transferring the property to Marcus to minimize estate tax implications and simplify inheritance procedures. The arrangement was supposed to protect our family assets while allowing me to continue living in my home until my death. I had trusted my son completely, never imagining that legal ownership could be used as a weapon against me. "Marcus," I turned to my son desperately, "you can't seriously be supporting this. This is your childhood home. We're family." For the first time during the conversation, Marcus looked directly at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. There was guilt, certainly, but also resignation and something that looked disturbingly like relief. "Dad, maybe it really would be better," he said softly. Amanda and I are trying to start our own family, and having 3 adults in the house creates complications. You could have your own space, your own life without worrying about disturbing us or following house rules." "House rules," I repeated incredulously. "These are rules imposed on me in my own home by someone who has lived here for less than 2 years." Amanda's mask of politeness finally slipped, revealing the steel underneath. "This is exactly the kind of dramatic reaction that proves our point, Lloyd. You're not adapting well to shared living space, and frankly, neither are we. We need privacy to build our marriage and plan our future." She handed me a piece of paper from her folder. "We're giving you 1 week to make arrangements. We've already identified several suitable apartments, and we're willing to help with moving expenses and first month's rent." I stared at the paper, seeing, but not comprehending the apartment listings and rental information they had compiled without my knowledge. They had been planning this conversation, researching my exile, while I remained obliviously tending my garden and trying to be a considerate housemate. 1 week, I asked, my voice cracking despite my attempts to maintain dignity. 1 week, Amanda confirmed. "We've been more than patient, Lloyd. It's time for everyone to move forward." I stood slowly, feeling every one of my 54 years weighing on my shoulders like concrete blocks. Without another word, I walked to my bedroom, packed a small suitcase with basic necessities, and left the house where I had expected to live until my death. That night, I sat in a generic motel room 6 miles from my home, staring at the ceiling and trying to process how my life had changed so completely in the span of a single conversation. The harsh fluorescent lighting and scratchy bedsheets of the Roadway Inn provided little comfort, but they offered something more valuable: clarity. As dawn broke through the thin curtains, I realized that wallowing in self-pity would accomplish nothing. If Amanda and Marcus thought they could discard me like outdated furniture, they had severely underestimated the man who had built a successful construction business from nothing and raised a son alone for 8 years. My first call went to Harold Brennan, my attorney and friend since high school. Harold had handled my business contracts for decades and guided me through the legal complexities following my wife's death. If anyone could help me understand my rights and options, it would be Harold. "Lloyd, what the hell happened?" Harold asked after I explained my situation over breakfast at Murphy's Diner. His weathered face showed genuine concern as he reviewed the property transfer documents I had brought with me. "Harold, I trusted them completely," I admitted, stirring sugar into my coffee with unnecessary force. When my accountant suggested transferring ownership to Marcus, it seemed like smart estate planning. I never imagined my own son would use it to throw me out. Harold studied the documents carefully, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. His silence stretched uncomfortably long before he finally looked up with something resembling optimism in his eyes. "Lloyd, you may have more options than you realize," he said, setting down his pen. "First, the property transfer included specific language about your lifetime residency rights. While Marcus has legal ownership, you retain certain protections as the previous owner who transferred property to family." He pointed to a paragraph buried in the legal text that I had never bothered to read carefully. "See this clause here? It specifically states that you maintain the right to occupy the property as your primary residence, unless you voluntarily relocate or violate specific terms outlined in the agreement." "But Amanda said I had to leave," I protested. "She gave me 1 week. "Amanda can say whatever she wants, but she cannot legally evict you without following proper procedures," Harold replied firmly. "Moreover, what they're attempting could constitute constructive eviction and possibly elder abuse under state law." Harold flipped to a new page in his legal pad and began outlining a strategy. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm calling my colleague Rebecca Martinez, who specializes in real estate law and property disputes. She can review this situation and provide additional options." While Harold made his phone call, I felt the first stirrings of hope since yesterday's devastating conversation. Perhaps I was not as powerless as Amanda wanted me to believe. 20 minutes later, Harold returned to our table with Rebecca Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning difficult battles. "Mr. Thompson?" Rebecca began, shaking my hand firmly. "Harold has explained your situation, and I've seen similar cases before. What your daughter-in-law is attempting is not only morally questionable, but potentially illegal." She opened her briefcase and withdrew several forms and documents. "I've brought paperwork to file an injunction preventing them from changing locks or further restricting your access to the property. Additionally, we can explore forcing a sale of the property to recover your equity investment." "Forcing a sale?" I asked, intrigued by the possibility. "You transferred valuable property to your son with the understanding that you could continue living there," Rebecca explained. "If they breach that understanding, we can petition the court to order a sale and distribute proceeds based on your original investment and improvements made over 40 years. Harold leaned forward with growing excitement. Lloyd, there's something else. I know someone who works with property acquisition companies. If we can demonstrate that your son is in default of the original agreement terms, we might be able to arrange a quick sale that protects your interests. The plan that emerged over the next hour was both elegant and satisfying. Rather than fighting a prolonged legal battle, we would present Marcus and Amanda with an immediate buyer for the property. The acquisition company would purchase the house at fair market value. I would receive my portion of the equity, and Amanda's dreams of playing house in my home would evaporate overnight. How quickly can we make this happen? I asked, feeling energy and purpose returning for the first time in months. Give me until Monday morning, Rebecca replied. I'll have the paperwork ready and a buyer representative prepared to make an offer they cannot legally refuse. Saturday morning brought the surreal experience of watching my own home from across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of Harold's sedan. What I witnessed made my blood boil and solidified my determination to proceed with our plan. Amanda had transformed my backyard into party central. Colorful balloons hung from the oak tree where Marcus once played as a child, and folding tables, covered with red checkered cloths, displayed an elaborate spread of food and drinks. A banner stretched between two posts read, "Welcome home, Amanda and Marcus," in cheerful blue letters. But the banner was not the most infuriating sight. Two older adults, clearly Amanda's parents, were directing traffic as if they owned the place. The woman who shared Amanda's auburn hair, but carried herself with even more authority, pointed toward my garden shed while instructing a younger man carrying boxes toward the house. The older man, tall and silver-haired, stood on my porch smoking a cigar and surveying the property with the satisfaction of a conquering general. Those must be Amanda's parents, I muttered to Harold, who was photographing the scene with his phone for potential legal documentation. Robert and Patricia Donnelly, Harold confirmed, checking his notes. Rebecca ran background checks yesterday. Robert is a retired insurance executive from Portland, and Patricia worked in real estate. They sold their house last month. The implication was clear. This was not a casual visit to meet the new in-laws. Amanda's parents had sold their home and moved in permanently, turning my house into a multi-generational compound for their family while casting me out to make room. Throughout the afternoon, neighbors arrived carrying casserole dishes and gifts, greeting Amanda's parents as if they were longtime residents. I watched Mrs. Patterson from next door hugging Patricia while Amanda introduced them as her wonderful parents who have come to help us settle into our new home. Marcus appeared briefly on the porch, but his body language suggested discomfort rather than celebration. He stood apart from the groups, occasionally nodding at neighbors' comments, but avoiding extended conversations. When Amanda called for him to help serve drinks, he responded slowly, like a man walking to his own execution. The most painful moment came when I observed Amanda giving tours of the house to interested neighbors. Through the bay window, I could see her leading groups through my living room, pointing out features and changes they planned to make. She gestured toward my study, probably explaining how they would convert it to accommodate their expanding family. She's already redecorating, I said to Harold, watching Amanda show off my wife's antique china cabinet as if it had always belonged to her. Let her enjoy it while she can, Harold replied grimly. Monday morning is going to be very educational for Mrs. Amanda Thompson. As evening approached and the party wound down, I noticed something that gave me a small measure of satisfaction. Marcus had disappeared inside the house early, leaving Amanda to handle the cleanup and farewells alone. Several times I saw her glancing toward the upstairs windows with obvious frustration, as if she expected her husband to emerge and fulfill his hosting duties. Robert and Patricia remained after the other guests departed, settling into porch chairs with drinks and continuing their celebration privately. They had clearly claimed the master bedroom that had been mine for 40 years, relegating Marcus and Amanda to the second bedroom. The hierarchy was already established, and Amanda was discovering that inviting her parents into the mix created complications she had not anticipated. Sunday morning arrived with crisp October air and crystal-clear skies that seemed to promise new beginnings. I met Harold and Rebecca at Murphy's Diner, where we rendezvoused with David Martinez, the property acquisition specialist who would serve as our buyer representative. David looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a successful real estate developer, mid-40s, immaculately groomed, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. He carried a leather briefcase and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to closing complicated deals quickly. "Mr. Thompson," David said, shaking my hand firmly, "Harold has explained your situation, and I want you to know that we handle cases like this regularly. Property disputes within families are unfortunately common, and we've developed efficient methods for resolving them. Rebecca spread copies of our legal documents across the diner table, pointing out key clauses and statutes that supported our position. The beauty of this approach, she explained, is that we're not attacking Marcus directly. We're simply exercising your legitimate property rights under the original transfer agreement. What exactly will happen when we arrive at the house? I asked, wanting to understand every detail of our strategy. David will introduce himself as a property acquisition specialist, conducting a market evaluation, Harold replied. He'll explain that recent research has identified the property as suitable for immediate purchase, and he's prepared to make a competitive cash offer. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued, I'll present the legal documentation that establishes your right to initiate a sale. Since Marcus is technically in breach of the residency agreement, you have standing to force liquidation of the asset. David opened his briefcase and withdrew an official-looking folder. I have a legitimate purchase offer here for $475,000, which represents fair market value based on recent comparable sales in your neighborhood. The offer includes a 30-day closing period, which gives everyone time to make alternative arrangements. The amount surprised me. I had purchased the house for $68,000 in 1985, and even accounting for improvements in maintenance, the appreciation exceeded my expectations. What happens to Marcus and Amanda? I asked, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and genuine concern for my son's future. They'll receive their share of the equity after your original investment and improvements are calculated, Rebecca explained. Based on preliminary estimates, they should walk away with approximately $150,000, which is more than enough for a substantial down payment on their own home. And if they refuse to cooperate, I pressed. They can't refuse, David said matter-of-factly. This is a legal sale proceeding under property law statutes. They can delay the process through litigation, but that would be expensive and ultimately unsuccessful. At 11:30, we drove to my house in 2 cars. Harold and I rode together while Rebecca and David followed in David's sleek black sedan. As we approached the familiar street, I felt my heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. The house looked peaceful in the late morning sunlight. Amanda's party decorations from yesterday had been cleaned up, and the yard appeared normal except for additional cars in the driveway, indicating that her parents were still in residence. Ready? Harold asked, parking across the street. I took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. I'm ready. We walked up the front steps together, 4 professionals prepared to deliver news that would change everything. I rang the doorbell of my own home, feeling strange about the formality, but determined to handle this situation with complete legal propriety. Amanda answered the door wearing a silk robe and fuzzy slippers, clearly not expecting visitors on Sunday morning. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked younger and more vulnerable than during our confrontational conversation 2 days earlier. Oh, hello, she said, focusing on David and Rebecca, whom she did not recognize. Can I help you? David stepped forward with his most professional smile. Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. My name is David Martinez, and I represent Pinnacle Property Acquisitions. I'm here to conduct a market evaluation on this property for potential immediate purchase. Amanda's expression shifted from confusion to curiosity. I'm sorry, but we're not interested in selling. This is our family home. Actually, I said, stepping into her line of sight, that's exactly what we need to discuss. The color drained from Amanda's face as she registered my presence alongside these official-looking strangers. Her hand tightened on the doorframe, and I could see her mind racing to understand what was happening. Lloyd, she stammered, what is this about? Who are these people? Rebecca stepped forward, extending her business card. Mrs. Thompson, I'm Rebecca Martinez, Mr. Thompson's attorney. We need to discuss some legal matters regarding this property ownership and the recent changes in residency arrangements. I don't understand, Amanda said, but her voice carried a note of panic that suggested she understood more than she was admitting. David opened his briefcase and withdrew the purchase offer documents. Mrs. Thompson, we've prepared a competitive cash offer for this property based on current market valuations. We're prepared to close within 30 days at $475,000. Amanda's mouth fell open as she stared at the official documents. You can't be serious. We live here. This is our home. Marcus? Her call brought Marcus hurrying down the stairs, followed closely by Robert and Patricia Donnelly. Marcus was still wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, while Amanda's parents had dressed for the day, but looked confused by the commotion. What's going on? Marcus asked, taking in the scene of his father accompanied by 3 professionals standing on their doorstep. Your father appears to be trying to sell our house, Amanda said, her voice rising with each word. Actually, Rebecca interjected calmly, Mr. Lloyd Thompson is exercising his legal rights under the property transfer agreement signed last year. The agreement specifically states that he maintains residency rights and equity interests in this property. She handed Marcus a copy of the original documents with highlighted sections clearly marked. As you can see here, the transfer was conditional upon maintaining Mr. Thompson's right to occupy the property as his primary residence. When you demanded that he vacate the premises, you breached the essential terms of the agreement. Harold stepped forward to support Rebecca's explanation. Marcus, this gives your father the legal standing to force a sale of the property to recover his equity investment. We've brought a qualified buyer prepared to complete the transaction quickly and fairly. Robert Donnelly, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. This is ridiculous. Amanda, call the police. These people are harassing us. David smiled politely at Robert. Sir, I can assure you that everything we're doing here is completely legal and proper. I'm a licensed real estate professional, and Mrs. Martinez is a qualified attorney representing Mr. Thompson's legitimate interests. Amanda looked desperately at Marcus, clearly expecting him to take charge and resolve the situation. But Marcus was reading through the legal documents with growing understanding and what appeared to be resignation. Dad, Marcus said quietly, looking up from the papers, is this really necessary? Can't we work something out? For the first time since arriving, I spoke directly to my son. Marcus, you gave me 1 week to find somewhere else to live after 40 years in this house. You sat silent while your wife treated me like an unwelcome stranger in my own home. What exactly did you think would happen? Amanda's composure finally cracked completely. You can't do this. We live here. We have rights. You do have rights, Rebecca acknowledged. You have the right to receive your proportional share of the sale proceeds after Mr. Thompson's original investment and improvements are accounted for. Based on our calculations, that should amount to approximately $150,000. Patricia Donnelly gasped at the amount. $150,000. We sold our house in Portland to move here permanently. We gave up everything. The admission confirmed what I had suspected. Amanda's parents had burned their bridges in Oregon, expecting to settle permanently in my house while I was conveniently relocated to some senior housing facility. David maintained his professional demeanor throughout the increasingly emotional conversation. I understand this news comes as a surprise, but I want to assure everyone that this is a fair market transaction. The 30-day closing period provides adequate time to make alternative arrangements. Marcus looked at his father with something approaching respect for the first time in months. Dad, I'm sorry, I really am. Amanda convinced me that this arrangement wasn't working, and I thought maybe she was right. I didn't realize you had legal options. Son, I replied sadly, I hoped we could resolve our differences as family. But when family turns against you, sometimes the law is the only protection you have left. Amanda began crying, whether from frustration, anger, or genuine distress I could not determine. Her parents flanked her protectively, but their expressions suggested they were beginning to grasp the reality of their situation. What happens now? Marcus asked quietly. Rebecca consulted her notes. We'll file the necessary paperwork tomorrow morning to begin the sale process. Mr. Martinez's company will handle all closing procedures, and everyone will receive their appropriate share of the proceeds. It's actually quite straightforward. As we prepared to leave, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief. Justice was being served, but the cost had been my relationship with my son and the loss of my lifelong home. 30 days passed more quickly than I had expected. The legal proceedings unfolded exactly as Rebecca had predicted, with minimal complications and maximum efficiency. Marcus and Amanda initially consulted their own attorney, who confirmed that our legal position was unassailable and advised them to cooperate with the sale process rather than waste money fighting an unwinnable battle. Amanda's parents returned to Oregon within the first week, staying in a hotel while they searched for a new home in Portland. The reality of their situation had sobered them considerably, and their departure eliminated much of the household tension that had made negotiations difficult. Marcus surprised me by requesting a private conversation during the second week of the sale process. We met at the same Murphy's Diner where Harold and I had planned our strategy, sitting across from each other in a corner booth away from other customers. Dad, I owe you an apology. Marcus began stirring his coffee nervously. I let Amanda manipulate me into betraying the most important person in my life. I was so focused on being a good husband that I forgot about being a good son. His words carried genuine remorse, and I could see the young boy I had raised struggling with the man he had become. Marcus' marriage requires balance. A good husband protects his wife, but he doesn't sacrifice his family to please her. I know that now, he replied. Amanda filed for divorce last week. She blamed me for not standing up to you, but the truth is, she never really wanted to be part of our family. She wanted to replace it with her own. The divorce news surprised me, though. Perhaps it should not have. Amanda had orchestrated our entire conflict to gain control of valuable property, and when that plan failed, she had no further use for Marcus or our family. "I'm sorry your marriage didn't work out," I said, meaning it sincerely. Despite everything that had happened, I had not wanted my son's relationship to fail. "Don't be sorry, Dad. This whole experience taught me something important about the difference between love and manipulation. Amanda never loved me for who I was, she loved what I could provide." We spent 2 hours talking about everything that had happened, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was having a conversation with my son rather than a stranger wearing his face. The property sale closed exactly 30 days after our Sunday morning visit, just as David had promised. The final numbers were even better than originally projected, with the house selling for $482,000 due to a slight bidding war between acquisition companies. After attorney fees and closing costs, I walked away with $295,000, which represented fair compensation for 40 years of mortgage payments, property improvements, and emotional investment. Marcus received $173,000, enough for a substantial down payment on a home of his own choosing. Rather than purchasing another large house that would remind me daily of what I had lost, I decided to downsize significantly. I bought a comfortable 2-bedroom condominium in a quiet complex populated by active adults who valued both independence and community. The condo featured modern appliances, minimal maintenance requirements, and a small patio where I could continue gardening on a manageable scale. Marcus found a modest 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood 15 minutes away, close enough for regular visits but far enough to establish his independence. We began having dinner together once a week, slowly rebuilding the relationship that Amanda had nearly destroyed. 6 months after the sale, I realized that losing my house had actually freed me from burdens I had not recognized. 40 years of accumulated possessions, maintenance responsibilities, and emotional attachments to the past had been weighing me down without my awareness. My new life was simpler, more focused, and ultimately more satisfying. The most important lesson I learned from this experience was that kindness should never be confused with weakness, and family loyalty cannot be taken for granted simply because it has always existed. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from, and recognizing that truth requires courage that many people never develop. I also discovered that standing up for yourself does not make you cruel or vindictive, it makes you strong. Amanda had counted on my unwillingness to fight back, and when I proved her wrong, her entire strategy collapsed. Bullies, whether they are strangers or family members, only succeed when their victims refuse to defend themselves. Today, I wake up each morning in my comfortable condo, drink coffee on my small patio, and tend to tomatoes and herbs in containers that remind me of my larger garden without overwhelming me. Marcus stops by regularly, sometimes bringing takeout for dinner and staying to watch sports on television. We are rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. Most importantly, I have learned that home is not a building or a piece of property. It is wherever you feel safe, respected, and valued. My Victorian house was beautiful and full of memories, but it had become a battlefield where I was constantly under siege. My condominium may be smaller and newer, but it is truly mine, and no one can take that away from me. The experience taught me that it is never too late to demand the respect you deserve, even from people you love. Family relationships require the same boundaries and mutual consideration as any other relationships, and when those boundaries are violated, consequences must follow. Sometimes protecting yourself requires making difficult decisions that others will not understand or appreciate, but your well-being cannot be sacrificed to maintain someone else's comfort. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members took advantage of your generosity and kindness? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you think I made the right choice in fighting back. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. Share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges with difficult family members. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your home should be a place where you feel valued and respected, not merely tolerated. Sometimes the greatest act of love for your family is teaching them that they cannot treat you poorly without consequences.